I'm so happy to see you.
Welcome back. It's been a long hiatus. We're back in our 25th episode of the Footnotes podcast. Woo! I will be eating grapes for the duration of this podcast. So while I chew on this, why don't you update me on what's been going on with your life, June?
Life updates. These are always tough, but I feel like my life has kind of stabilized a bit. So I'm off the keto diet. I have been for like a month or so. I haven't been cooking a lot. I've been just eating out wherever and whenever I can. And I find that my food expenses are probably like still around the same because I was so used to buying like premium bougie keto ingredients, which is kind of ridiculous. So that's opened up a lot of like time for me to actually sit down and study. So I've been kind of getting in the groove of like kind of really immersing myself in the material. Yeah, I feel like it's been a good couple of weeks for me. Yeah, I don't know. Did you have major life events updates?
When was the last time we talked? Was it like when I was on break? Yeah.
Yeah, when
Before when I was on break, right?
Or during break.
Okay.
Last few days.
Oh yes, I remember now. Yeah. Well, I've been having I've been doing anatomy for the last 2 weeks because we're on head and neck anatomy.
Oh, okay.
I've been having like flashbacks to second year undergrad anatomy, and in both good and bad ways.
Yeah.
Good because I feel like I went back into that zone of learning anatomy and I kind of took to my normal routine, but then bad because that normal routine was traumatic.
Yeah.
It hurt me. So it was a painful experience, but I got through. Had a little examination and I think I passed. So that's good. This week, like I said, is tech week for Western's show. So there's rehearsal today, there's rehearsal tomorrow, and then Friday's the show, Saturday's the show. And then I get super lit on Saturday night, and then I don't wake up on Sunday till at least noon. And then I just go about my business starting after that. So I know I'm going to have a lot of fun. I know this is going to be a very exciting week. I'm going to probably destroy my body in many ways that I would not like. But, I mean, this always happens. I'm always surprised at how quickly things come together and in the last week of any show. Like, this has been going on for like the 4 years in undergrad. And even now, like, it took until I think the last Sunday rehearsal for things to actually pick up. And now I got re-excited about the show because I saw how good it was.
Right.
I had this dip where I'm like, oh, shit, like this is not going as planned. But then all of a sudden people started practicing and came in with all this new talent. I'm like, okay, this is going to be good.
Right.
So that's hopefully going to carry me through this week. And yeah, it's going to be a good experience.
Yeah. Do you remember in our first year's psychobiology class, we had to submit like online responses for a discussion forum, and we had to fill in like a certain quota by the end of the term. The one thing I remember from that course is the prof showing us, like he graphed a quantity of like submissions over the semester, and it's like, yeah, over like 80-90% of the semester, it's just kind of like basically flat line, and then at the end there's like an exponential peak. So I think that's referred to as Parkinson's law. It's the law that tasks fill this amount of time that they're given, and it'll, I don't know, if you had to do Taki in 1 month, you may have reached a like similar quality just because you had to.
Yeah, I feel that a lot.
Yeah, maybe the exponential spike might have started a little, near the beginning.
Well, I want to talk about this because like
Yeah.
the fourth years, they also have a show, right? Each year has their own show. And the fourth years have a 40-minute show compared to like 20 minutes for everyone else. But everyone in fourth year is gone for electives for most of the year. And then from the day that they get matched onwards, it's basically the time frame that they spend on tacky.
Yeah.
And like they're not doing a lot. Like they're just like bumming around,
Yeah.
like finalizing details and stuff. But they pulled together this 40-minute show
Yeah.
in like a month. So I can see how that law would apply there. And like personally, I'm like super excited to be at that place where I'm like, okay, I've matched. I've got like nothing else to do. I'm just gonna participate in this musical and make it great and amazing. And it's gonna be a 1 month, binge, and I'm gonna enjoy it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Things just seem to work out when we know we have to do it. It's funny. This episode, I wanted to kind of discuss an idea with you, and we'll see how far we can take it.
Okay.
But it's around the idea of living a life of meaning, which is something we've discussed on the periphery or like as a central topic, I'm sure many times in our 25 episodes. But I'll tell you a story about something that happened to me around maybe 2 weeks ago. And like it was one particular night, like I was just hanging out with a friend. And I don't know, I felt some kind of inner discomfort, some kind of tension, some kind of shakiness, some kind of restlessness. And I didn't know why, but I felt as though the bodily signal that I was getting was something like you're not living in the most meaningful way that you could right now. Like you're not spending your time doing what is most meaningful to you. And the way that manifested was like this kind of weird discomfort. And then so I kind of I knew I had to address this. So I like told my friend, hey, like there's something on my mind. Can I like share that with you? And then I went on this whole rant. And the rant goes something like this. So I started out with the idea of sin. Like so sin sounds like a very like antiquated and kind of weird religious moralistic idea. But the original word like for sin, hamartia, is an archery. I think it's a Greek archery term, and it means missing the mark. And that's a strange idea because you'd expect sin to be something like, oh, if you aim at a person instead of a like target, that's sin. Maybe that's like a wrong aim, and maybe that's a worse type of sin. But to label sin as something just like, oh, it's off the bullseye, even that is sin. I kind of struggled how to kind of frame that and understand that. Like, why was that particular concept used? And maybe it's meaningless and maybe it's just an accident, but let's not go there for now. So I start off with that idea. And then I start thinking about, okay, well, like one of the ideas of complexity science, bringing in multiple ideas, but hopefully I can weave them together somehow. One of the ideas in complexity science is that when you act on or like in a complex system, like the society or like the world that you live in, your actions will have unintended consequences. And that's actually like a very strange idea for modern people, because we're so used to having machines around that we can have an action, we can see the immediate consequence. If I turn on the light, flick and light goes on. Boom, cause effect. So we're so used to thinking in these linear, mechanistic terms of how the world works. And so we think we have a grasp of basically what the consequences of our actions are. If I do X, Y happens. But the cool thing about complexity science is that it says, no, like your actions in a complex system, whether it's like super small, like can have like exponentially large effects. So the classic example being the butterfly effect, right? Flap a wing in Texas result in a hurricane in like New Mexico. Theoretically possible because, as you know, studying the human body, the world is full of feedback loops and interactions that can multiply each other and go out of control. So you think about the fact that our actions have unintended consequences, have consequences that we have like no idea how, they'll trickle down, trickle down in the future. So for example, like I've had this thought, like, what if, like, do you think it's sinful to live in the house that you live in? And what I mean by that is, so like we have lights and electricity on in our house, and we have a tremendous amount of resources devoted to like building, insulating, heating the place. And if you took like the sum amount of energy, like measured it in joules, that we're spending on a whim, it might be something like that might have been enough energy to run like an entire city, a few hundred years ago. Right. So the idea is there may be like far-reaching or kind of calculable consequences that we're just not aware of. And so the question becomes, okay, if you live in a world where if you try to do the right thing, maybe you'll do some good, but I don't know, there's so many unintended consequences that can result as a consequence of what you do. So, who knows if you're like creating sin or creating suffering through an act that you thought was benign, but was actually like, I don't know, draining the Earth's resources like more than anyone else in like humanity, more than like some of the most tyrannical kings, that come before you. You're like, well, holy shit, like this is how should you live? Like, how should you act? And then that's a terrible like moral dilemma. But I think the kind of semblance of an answer is basically, okay, you have to live in the best way that you can, that you know how, to at least mitigate or be aware of these consequences. But but that's a terrible burden too. Like, then I can't do anything. Oh, if I turn this light switch on, how much energy will that expend, and how much of that energy could have gone to poor people? And or if I eat this food, like, am I supporting a GMO company that's making farmers commit suicide because they have a monopoly on the genetically modified seeds? Like it's endless. The ethical considerations of your choices. And so here's where the meaning part kind of comes along. So you can act in a way that's like absolutely certain. We'll make sure that there are zero unintended consequences of your actions. I don't know, maybe if I thought living in this world was just inherently sinful, I might retreat to some like rural part of, I might retreat to like my house in Toronto, and in the backyard, I'll just live based on what the land is giving me and sustain my existence that way. And that way, like, I'll somehow know that I'm contributing like zero like suffering to the world. On the other hand, you can say like, fuck it, like I'm just gonna do whatever I want without any consideration of like what I'm doing. And you know, so there's like a order chaos dichotomy there, you know, within the potential ranges of actions that you have. You're always balancing like the things that you know, the things that you think will be good for your future and like other people's futures, but there's always an unknown of like, oh, is there a better way? Is there something that's better? And our best way that our nervous systems approximate like which of those domains that we should act in for optimal benefit to us and optimal benefit to like the people around us, you know, that's our sense of meaning, right? So when we're acting in that like place of meaning, we're working with what we know. We're trying to kind of predict the outcomes of what's going to happen as a consequence of our actions as much as possible, but still allowing a level of uncertainty and possibility that like something unexpected might happen. You know, this is living on the edge of your comfort zone. What you know is comfort, and what you don't know is not comfort. So it seems to me that the optimal way you can act in any situation is the one that is like most meaningful and compelling to you. And so I basically had this rant with my friend, like back to the story. And as I was saying it, I was starting to shake. Like my body was shaking all over. My heart rate was going up, you know, like it's a very weird phenomenon. And then my friend asked me like, Jun, why are you shaking? And then I said, I think it's because I'm afraid of something. Okay. And so that kind of prompted me to like dive into what I was afraid of. And what I was afraid of was something like basically an apocalypse. You know, a situation where chaos and suffering floods the world because we haven't been paying attention to what's been going on. You know, you know, I'll tell a side when Jun was high story. So a year ago, like, you know, I was just smoking it up with a close friend, and we were watching a really good YouTube history video on the like it was like a 7-part video series on the historical factors that led to the collapse of the Roman Empire. And as I was watching that, and when I was high, I was like, yeah, political fragmentation, yeah, corruption, yup, monopoly of land and resources, yup. Like I was just like checking off all the sure sign symptoms of maybe like civilizational death and collapse. You know, watching that like meticulously researched and well presented video, and I was going, okay, what does it mean that I like recognize all those things? And the implication is obvious. It's something like, oh, if we keep going the way we're going, we'll end up the same way the Romans did and their great civilization. It kind of all falls apart at once, and it's very difficult to imagine that, but it's happened many times before. And I mean, I'm not like a you know, physician. I can't diagnose like a country or civilization, but that seems to me the same way we're headed. And so when I had that thought, I felt this like almost evil figure consuming me, not consuming me, but like maybe almost invading a part of me. It's like a blackness that's creeping up like half a side of me. And then I was able to kind of speak to it, like while in this kind of high state. And it said something to me like, hey kid, like you don't know anything yet. So, you know, be careful not to piss me off. It was a very strange experience, but since then I've like always had that like fear that's been unresolved. It's like I peered into the darkness. I've peered into like what kind of suffering like the current state of things and my current way of life might produce. Like it was an encounter with evil, right? So, you know, back to me being with my friend, like when I was shaking, when I like looked deeper into that, I realized the reason I was shaking was because of that terror, was because of that terror of the suffering that could manifest in the world if like something didn't change. And so I was shaking, and then I kind of came to like a realization, and that realization was something like the best way to proceed is to, as much as possible, at as many times as you possibly can, like pursue what is meaningful. And kind of my shaking stopped. It was like a reconciliation with the devil, or like I shook hands with the devil. You know, basically, if you're on your, let's say, best behavior, or if you keep walking this meaningful line, you won't contribute to, let's say, you'll be doing the most that you can to prevent catastrophe. And like simultaneously, you'll be doing the thing that is most fulfilling and worthwhile and compelling to you. So it's like that sounds great. You know, if you can live a life that's like best for you, best for others, best for the world, like who wouldn't want to do that? You know, why not? So, you know, that's kind of the introduction. Yeah, if I could summarize all that, you know, there's a million ways to act, but I think that the one that is most optimal is like following that meaningful path.
So my question to you is, have you felt like you haven't been pursuing that meaningful path? Like what made you fear apocalypse so much that, you know, these thoughts start to percolate more?
Well, okay, so I think there's like kind of two questions there. It's like, how do I know like I hadn't been pursuing a meaningful like path? And I think you know that when like the way you are acting in the world is like producing suffering or like some kind of tension within yourself, right? It's if you're acting in a way that's not, let's say, harmonious with your own nature, then there's going to be unresolved like tensions that pile up and pile up. So like one thing I could realize and kind of try to solve quickly was, okay, the way I'm studying is like I'm just forcing myself to get ready for others in my group tutorial and doing just enough to, let's say, yeah, present my information and not get a bad eval from my supervisor, right? And that was causing me like a lot of stress, because then I'm living in a way that's motivated by like fear and other people's expectations, and like that, in some ways, that's like the most horrible way you can live, because there's no there's no satisfaction when you like go to tutorial and sit through your 3-hour class. It's just, you know, maybe you're absolved of a little bit of guilt, but there's no sense of like achievement in that, like, wow, I pursued a goal that I wanted to go to, and I got it. It's just, oh, I staved off the fear and anxiety just a little bit longer until next time. So one thing I changed was, okay, like when I'm studying, I should like try to pay more attention to that. Like when I do things, I needed to be motivated by my sense of like curiosity and meaning, and not by fear. And then like you start paying attention to what you're doing on the basis of fear, and it's like, wow, it's just so much, just so much that you do just because you're afraid of certain consequences. And kind of the wake up call in that moment was, yeah, be motivated by something that's compelling to you. So when I prepare now, I'll always try to like pursue something I'm curious about. Like I won't just study just to study. Like it, like really genuinely about learning. And I don't know, so far I've been doing better in my tutorials. I feel like I could talk in a more enthusiastic way. I could be a little bit more of a leader. And things have gotten better because of that, when I followed what's meaningful. So, you know, okay, but the second part of the question you asked me was something like, why did I start having those kind of fears about apocalypse and the catastrophe? And I think like part of it, maybe most of it, is like my experiences when I was high. I think in those states, you become very open and receptive. And that can be wonderful because you can be more receptive to beautiful things in the world. You can be more receptive to your own creative spirit, and make music or express things to people that you wouldn't have expressed otherwise. But the flip side is, in comparison to all that beauty you see, you can also see something that is its polar opposite. You can kind of gaze into the darkness, and I think basically what happened was, I think I was traumatized by it, and then I kind of sealed it off and said, "Oh, I'm never gonna look at that again." Like, ha ha ha! What a funny dream I had, ha ha. But the more experiences I accumulate, and the more I learn about the kind of things that are going on in the state of the world, or in the state of even like my own city and the communities that I'm a part of, like you start to realize that, yeah, the kind of like hell and catastrophe that I was dreaming of like some long time in the future, no, like it's here now. We just don't see it. Like either because of ignorance, or to be more generous, because we're nice, tidy, uptown folks with a good education and comfortable life. But we're at the tip of the iceberg. The 90% of what goes on below is like very horrific. And it's my sense that as I pursue what's most meaningful and compelling to me, I will get to explore the kind of dark side of the iceberg. And like right now I can't like conceive of how that process will be. I can talk about it, and I'm a very pretty naive perspective about it. But yeah, that's where my kind of apocalyptic thinking comes from.
So some thoughts have been percolating. I'm just gonna change this view of my screen so I see your face and not mine. So I hate talking while seeing my own face. So a few things. So I think the first problem that presents to me is, so people seem to put themselves at a position of God when they think about ethics and when they think about responsibility. And they don't, I feel like people don't include themselves when they say that they have to make the right decisions for their community and for society. Like, people don't take into consideration that they also owe it to themselves to treat themselves like the kinds of being that deserves respect and deserves, the proper treatment, right? So treat your neighbor as you would treat yourself should also say treat yourself as you would treat your neighbor. So what I'm trying to get at with that idea is that, it's a lot to say that all you have to do is pursue meaning, because in that way, I think your resolution is that you can both benefit the people around you as well as yourself if you pursue meaning, because you're doing what's right for you, but then that ends up being right for other people. I'm inclined to say that sometimes it isn't right for you. And the reason why is because when you perceive what is meaningful,
mm-hmm.
It is often influenced by what other people think is meaningful. And since you get feedback from other people, positive or negative, your sense of meaning is not completely separate from what other people think. So because of that intercommunication, sometimes what you think is meaningful is actually what people around you think is meaningful or think is good for them.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up pursuing that, thinking that you're doing what you think is good for you and good for everyone, but really it could just be good for other people. So for example, like the ethic of, you should give before you take. That sort of idea. That's sort of cultivated by other people, because when you give to other people, you get positive feedback and you get reinforced for it. But sometimes when you pursue that too much, right, you lose sense of who you are and you start to give up too much. So that's the first idea. That maybe that's two ideas. The first being, you should treat yourself with just as much respect as you do with other people, and then the second being that your sense of meaning is not always separate, or it's not independent. It's always influenced by what other people think is also meaningful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had a third point. I think the third point is you have to be really careful when you start to take in too much of the world. So one thing that I think is dangerous about drugs, about like psychedelics and things like that, is you start to see too much. You start to make a lot more connections.
Yeah.
And I think that is inherently dangerous, because what it means is you're introducing a large influx of chaos, and when you have that, your order is messed up essentially. And you have to somehow reintroduce order back into your life, somehow balancing this new influx of chaos. So if you aren't able to do that properly, then you're gonna end up lost, right? So I see this with some of my friends who are depressed, but also hold themselves to a very high ethical standard. And there's this mismatch where they have this ideal of what they should be doing and what they should be doing in terms of like making the world better and trying to improve society and things like that. But they themselves are almost powerless. They're just like an individual, and they don't know how to enact that ideology. So that mismatch is what destroys them. They have this grand idea, but they can't execute because they're only human. So I think something in the Bible says something like, you shouldn't overstep your boundaries and try to be God.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be punished. Something like that. Like you shouldn't.
It's like the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Wisdom.
Yeah, like, watch out.
Yeah, watch out. Like,
yeah.
How dare you? Like,
yeah.
step on the hands or the feet of God. Like, how dare you try to take that position from him?
Yeah.
I think that's worthwhile because it's actually a pragmatic solution to that idea that you can't do everything. You got to start where you are. So here's me saying all the order to what you've been saying is.
Okay.
Be careful, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's first take the idea of the way we like find meaning in things is a dynamic and social process.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So other people's perceptions of what is meaningful and what they value has a large sway on what we value. And I've also been thinking about this idea of value. Like, what is it that you value? And one of the most fundamental ways we can see what people value is by seeing their gaze. Because to what you value, your attention will go.
Mm-hmm.
And right, so we know the phenomena of maybe, this kind of idea of a lot of people going in one direction in like a large road, let's say the mainstream, just going along with things and valuing like consumerism and all the things that we talked about before. And you see that their gaze is turned, and to them that's something that's like meaningful or supposedly meaningful. But for some reason, you don't see the meaning in that. Or it's the idea that because the construction of meaning is a social process, something that we've learned is that what a lot of people look at, attend to, or do is what is meaningful or is what is valuable, without ever really considering what it is that they're looking at or find valuable, right? So it's a kind of like outsourcing of, thinking, right? Like, why should I find for myself what is meaningful and valuable when I can look at what other people are looking to and attending to? And the answer is, well, a lot of the times what other people are looking to and compelled by are actually like very meaningful things. A lot of people may not know what they're looking at. They might just be looking at it because other people are doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's times where that kind of group mentality is like false. Ends up being something very vain or shallow, like, I don't know, like this obsession with consumer culture. Right. So yes, your sense of meaning has elements of social influence. But the thing is that based on our own values, we can kind of reorient our GPS system and find and discuss with people who we think have a better compass towards what's meaningful and what should be more valuable than that like Gucci bag, right? Or that Supreme sweater. And so, yeah, the fact that meaning can be socially influenced is a terrible curse, like, but it's also, also a gift because it means we can find other people to reorient what we should value with, so that we can literally stand apart and look to a different direction when it's needed. And that doesn't mean like, our own values and perceptions of what's meaningful isn't biased and distorted in some way. Like a lot of this discussion is like, probably an offshoot of the thoughts of Jordan Peterson. So we're like maybe kind of microcosm of good Christian Korean boys playing out this game of like these kind of values, right?
I'm not Christian though.
What was that?
I'm not Christian though, just to put it on the books.
Oh yeah, I have, yeah, like a pseudo Christian boy and a non-Christian boy. Yeah. Yeah. So this social redirection of meaning can be very helpful. And to your second point about, knowing too much can be a curse. And it's a curse if you can't integrate it into like how you live your life, or it doesn't inform you, it doesn't become a part of you. It can't properly become a part of you. And it's such a strange idea, but I think some of the best ways I have of understanding it is in the Naruto story, right? So boy is born with demon fox. It's a spirit of evil and chaos, and it's killed like thousands of people in the village. So that's what it does. And over time, as the hero Naruto becomes more mature, more powerful, more capable of, let's say, understanding and experiencing the suffering of like the world and of things, it starts to form a partnership with this chaotic beast. And at the end, there's some kind of union that makes Naruto kind of like transcendent, all-powerful, like a mega hero, which is like really fun, exciting, and interesting idea. But the idea is that like as you tread through darkness of your own, and let's say still be able to stay afloat, or let it into the canvas of your life, then you can harness it. So that darkness and chaos is like a weird form of energy that you can tap into. And it's a weird idea. So I just wanted to give you like an image of the canvas example. So like when kids are young, they're like drawn to kind of bright primary colors, right? Like neon blues and yellows and reds, and you see your clothes from when you were a kid and you're like, oh my God, how did I ever wear that?
So tacky, dude. So tacky.
Yeah. But as your experiences in life grows, you, I don't know, develop a taste for like nuances and dark colors to start appearing in the like canvas of your wardrobe. And I think like what that's akin to is like something that gives the painting depth, literally depth, is the use of like darker colors and shades, right? Like without that, you can't have a sense of depth and about the painting. And it's when you're able to use the shadow in a way that complements like the light that is there, that's when you know like the darkness has been properly integrated. And because it's there, it forms like a more vivid and living picture. So I don't know, that's kind of my thoughts on the treading in darkness idea. Like only dip into like, you know, the blackness canvas, that which you understand and can use.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up in a conversation about meaning, because it sort of suggests that meaning is not necessarily just something that is good. It incorporates aspects of what you would consider bad, and it has just as much depth as the thing that you're talking about, right? Like it's because meaning is not necessarily something like happiness.
No.
We'd associate with something that's, you know, good and pleasurable. So then, let's say, for example, because I know both of us have had some experience trying to integrate like our shadows, particularly anger. I think is something that both of us have like talked about previously. So how does something like that turn into meaning? How does the integration of anger turn into meaning? Like, is it just that it becomes a tool for which we can achieve some greater purpose, or is the very nature of having that anger or having some expression of that, is that meaningful in some way?
Yeah, like I think it's both, right? Like, yeah, in terms of that like raw anger.
Yeah, it's like a drive. It's its own energy, right?
Yeah, it has its own like if I put on the mask of anger, emotional state of anger, then that would have like a qualitative, let's say, energy that's completely different from, you know, like happy, relaxed you. Like something would shift in my eyes and like the way I contort my body and get it ready for activation. Like it's just a whole different pattern. And a part of me thinks it's, you know, it's something like we talked about the idea of like the ecosystem of your mind. When you let a part of it come to the surface, it's kind of like, I'm alive again. You know, I'm back to life. This feels great. It's like it takes turns using your body as a vessel to kind of live itself out in the world, to manifest kind of its will or its purpose, or its function as this kind of psychological pattern or energy, whatever you want to call it. So I think like the degree to which you can let it live and let it breathe, and that way you kind of appease it and satisfy it. It's like feeding your wolf like a steak. You're letting it know like, I'm still your master. I'm still the alpha dog that you should be subservient to. And that's why you and I have an agreement that like you know, wolf should not kill me. And so I think there's a way of kind of like negotiating, let's say, use time between like the kind of Yeah, for example, for your anger, like when you let it be expressed, you're feeding it, and you're letting it know that, yeah, you are like under my control or leadership, like follow me. Another example I kind of thought of was, can it be used as a tool sometimes? And that reminds me of, there are cases where like mothers will see, for example, their legs are stuck under the wheels of under the wheels of a like a minivan or like a similar sized truck. And there are case reports where that like mother will rush to their child and like generate enough force to lift the truck like temporarily for like 2-3 seconds, enough for the like passerbys to pull the child out. And it's like, wow, how did that happen?
Right.
Like in theory, like you should have enough energy and like metabolic resources at your disposal to generate enough of that force, but usually we don't do it because a part of us knows that it will harm the integrity of like the system, right? But in certain times, that like spirit of like, anger and panic and like that's the most important thing in my life right now, I need to do that, it kind of activates all at once, and I don't know, you do like something miraculous because of it. And so yeah, there's a lot of ways in which this like integrated darkness, this like beast that you've tamed, is able to manifest and help you in your journey.
I think there's another aspect of that we can talk about, which is expression. So expression is very important, I think, when it comes to meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why. Whenever I'm doing something that I think is meaningful, and when I'm practicing it and acting it out, all questions are gone. There's no doubt that this is what I'm meant to do.
Yeah.
And I've been feeling that more, I think, in my first year of medical school than I've ever done in my entire undergrad. Mostly because I feel like I personally, my value system is I value hard work and I value routine and I value sort of this constant practice idea. And because my curriculum is set such that, I wake up at the same time, I go to school, I have lectures from 8:30 to up to 12.
Yeah.
I do that. And then I have other activities in the afternoon and I just do that. And that's my work for the day. And I keep rolling like that for days on end. To me, that is meaningful because I feel like I'm slowly making progress to something that I want, right? So without that expression of meaning, without that practice aspect, I think I run dry. Like I feel like I'm not doing the right thing. And there's this idea that I've been toying with for the last week is that, what is the difference between an amateur and a professional? And I always think, the professional is the one that has the routine, that has, that game plan always in mind and follows through. And the amateur is more like a dabbler, someone who does something just because they feel like doing it, not because it's something that they have to do, right? And I think to myself, I want to be a professional, and in the things that I think are important, like medicine. Like I want to be a professional, and that comes out, of course, with the appropriate practice and the appropriate expression of the things that I think are meaningful and important. So, linking back to what you were saying about anger and how you have to negotiate it coming out and expressing it, I think you could broaden that and say, that applies to everything that you do. Is you have to make some sort of negotiation because you can't let it overwhelm you and you can't like suppress it for too long, a lot of these needs. But you have to do it in a way that's productive and in line with what you find to be meaningful. And that's the practice that you need to make it come out in a way that's best for you, essentially.
Right. It's like it's alignment and collaboration with your other values.
Mhm.
And the most meaningful will be when all those ecosystem or pets or those system of values and those hierarchy of like internal psychological beings or patterns are all serving your highest purpose.
Mhm.
And that word, like professional, just think about the word, like what does it mean? You're a unnul at professing. What are you, professor? What is that? The strange word.
Profess.
Yeah. Profess. It's not confess.
No.
Confessing sounds as if like you're doing it from a place of guilt. Someone asks you like, oh, what have you been doing? And then you confess. When you profess, you're kind of actively speaking or practicing like what you feel is true and like what is most you.
Can I give you the dictionary definition, because I like this a lot?
All right.
It's the second definition is to affirm one's faith in or allegiance to.
Yeah.
It's to like affirm your
Yeah.
commitment.
Yeah.
It's a commitment.
Yeah. It's a commitment to like a value.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were, our readings this week, coincidentally, was like on this very topic of, we were talking about hidden curriculum and, there's what medical professionals should aspire to do versus what it is in reality. And the hidden curriculum is like that kind of reality that medical students encounter when they actually start working in hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
But some of what the readings were talking about was like to be in a profession, like what that means is that you are committing or you are having your allegiance to a set of values. And those set of values, they did a literature search across like, many different definitions or criteria of what a physician is. And it's pretty universal, like commitment to truth and science, kind of like non-harm and beneficence, and a kind of selflessness. Like there's all these principles that like, yeah, I mean, it's also in CanMeds. Yeah, like to be a professional is to have your allegiance to a set of like values, set of moral values, and to say, this is the way I am going to conduct myself in life. And like, that's powerful.
Yeah.
I think like psychologically, that is no different than serving a God.
Mm-hmm.
Because that God is your role model. That God represents the embodied set of values that you are professing to, and that you are following, that you are striving to become.
Mm.
So, when we become professional, when we become anything, we're serving these gods of different values. Like, also, how do you choose the right one?
I've also been toying with the idea that you should choose your specialty, your medical specialty, based on the type of person you want to become, or the types of virtues that you think you want to uphold. So for me, like the allure of emergency is that emergency physicians are met with acute cases and are sort of put on this like high risk, high stakes kind of situation, and they can kind of keep their cool and manage things that productively and effectively. And I think that's something I would want for myself, because I know like inherently I'm a very emotional person, and I'm influenced by a lot of emotional drives, but I want to be the kind of person who can keep a cool head and still get through and, you know, deliver results even when there's a lot of pressure. So I don't know, like, does that tickle you in any way, that, you know, maybe there's a profession out there for you that's, or a specialty out there for you that is representative of the kind of person you want to be?
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Lubani,
Yeah.
the emergency, yeah, he was just at MAC today giving a talk about, you know, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to him, but kind of after the talk, he was talking about emergency medicine and yeah, how medical education is kind of soul destroying, and how there's very high like turnover and burnout rates within emergency because of shift work, because, you know, he was kind of describing his experience as like you see so much shit and you have to become callous to it. So the examples he gave were, you know, one patient comes in with excruciating like pain that's like suffering right in front of him, describes it as 12 out of 10. But, you know, Dr. Lubani had to send him home because there were other priorities. Or like someone in like genuine psychological distress comes in and says, if you send me home without like giving me anything, like I am literally going to stab myself, like at home, like just watch me. And you have to send him home because there are different priorities. And the priority he had briefly mentioned was patient safety. Like if that patient is safe within, I don't know, safe enough so that they don't require an emergency bed, or, you know, then they should be sent home. And like it's a very cruel algorithm. And like once you start playing that game, like you become this kind of, what he said himself, like a terrible person. And so the kind of ideal values that you hope to profess to, and the actual kind of tyrannical king you serve as part of the, you know, the lands of emergency medicine in Canada, like might be a completely different story.
Fair enough.
But, you know, this is maybe we can close this with this kind of idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of the central predicament in the Old Testament of the Bible. So you have this tribe called like the Israelites, and they profess to serve this highest God. There is no God that is like above that God, and you know, supposedly like they're trying to best to uphold the values that they think are, which are most sacred. So they're doing that, but they're constantly bouncing around between like basically tyrannical civilizations, being held captive by them and being forced to like either enslaved or just like work or forced to assimilate into that culture. And so, you know, they'll end up in places like Egypt or Babylon or like the Roman Empire, where yeah, you're in like a terrible bind. Like you want to kind of serve these higher values, but at the same time, like you can't not play the game of like that tyrannical kingdom. Like in that tyrannical kingdom of emergency medicine, I don't know, it'd be very difficult to be like, oh, I'm actually going to spend 40 minutes talking to this patient because I believe that's right. Like, no, like you'll get fired. Or like back in the day, the Israelites, like you'd be beheaded or exiled or tortured. But there's a strange idea. It's something like, okay, yeah, it is not wise to just run away from the tyrannical kingdom, or just to completely play its corrupt game.
Mm-hmm.
What you should do is to, yeah, be a citizen, be a part of that tyrannical kingdom. But when it comes to decisions that infringe or step over like the highest value that you're serving, the thing that you find most meaningful, or that the thing that you've professed to, then when that challenge comes, like I think God says to the Israelites, like, you're going to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to affirm your like identity as like the people of God, or the people who serve these set of values. And so that's the way like the Israelites do it. They'll live in other nations. They won't be fully part of the system. They'll cling to their own traditions, and that makes them highly, let's say, vulnerable to identification as the other, and for a kind of prejudice and hatred and scapegoating. But even despite that, like the message is something like, stick to the highest values when it is challenged. Like, can you do that? And like that's a very scary thing, right? If you value order and regularity, then a threat to your career, or like at least you think the threat to your career, that might happen as a result of like defiance of this tyrannical like king. Like, yeah, you could lose your career. You could, I don't know, who knows what could happen.
Mm-hmm.
But the question still remains, like, are you going to stick to what's meaningful even then, even when things get challenging, and you like have to genuinely like struggle within yourself for your need for certainty, or are you gonna follow? That I think that's the fundamental kind of dilemma of our time, or of all time. Like, it's always been a situation like this that humanity is placed in, where we live in in a very corrupt and tyrannical kingdom. Yeah. It's a series of kind of tests, and my like naive kind of optimistic hypothesis is that if you continue to follow what's meaningful, even despite of like opposing values, where you will end up is the like best place you could be, where you will feel like most fulfilled and alive.
Mm. It's a good thesis, and I'm honestly tired, so I can't like come up with a good response, I suppose. To keep things light, there is this Reddit page, this meme page called. Basically, it's like this Reddit. Awful taste but great execution.
Wait, what is it called?
Awful taste but great execution.
Uh-huh.
So this is my response to your following meaning.
Okay.
So it's a bunch of images where, like, whatever it is, it's just done with such skill.
Yeah.
But the thing itself is just terrible. Like, it's just, why? So it's like just really tacky things. So how this links back is, sometimes you could be misguided.
Yes.
Hopefully your sense of meaning is well informed.
Yeah.
You're willing to change it depending on new information that you get. But
I am dependent on my social feedback loops.
yes.
Yeah.
It's a constant battle for sure. All right, dude. Thank you for tuning in. This was a good comeback episode, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll continue our conversations in the next week. Hopefully.
All right.
All right. Good talking to you.
I'll see you soon.